Hey guys, what's up? It's Eric with Advanced Level Automotive. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another case study. So today I got called out to come take a look at this Ford F-150 pickup truck. It's a 1999 year model. It's got the V6 4.2 liter engine, and the customer complaint is that the vehicle intermittently will be a crank no start. So what he's telling me is that in the morning when he goes to start the truck up, oftentimes it'll just crank and crank and crank. It will not start. But eventually, after cranking for a while, the truck does start and it runs fine all day until the following day whenever he lets it sit, I guess for a few hours. Then the truck becomes a crank no start once again. So anyways, we're here to take a look at the truck. Now, unfortunately, I am running into a little bit of a dilemma because when I first got here, the first thing I wanted to do before I pulled out the camera and all of that was verify the complaint. And so I got into the truck, and of course, it would crank, crank, crank. It would not start. I did it about 3 times, and so I went to grab my camera, my equipment, my scan tool to get set up to start doing the video. But as soon as I went to try to crank the engine over again, it started right up and everything went back to normal. But I did notice something while the vehicle was cranking and not starting, something that's a really big clue for me as to what the problem might be. And so I figured, you know, this would make a good case study video. So let me take you guys over to the truck and show you what's going on. All right guys, so here's our pickup truck. Now, like I said, when I first got here, the vehicle was a crank no start for the first few minutes, and right now it's been sitting for a little bit. So I've got the key right here. I'm going to go ahead, stick the key into the ignition, and we're going to take a look at the instrument cluster. Now, the first thing that I was looking for was a check engine light. So if you look right over here, you can see the service engine soon light. This is an indication that the ECM or the PCM is communicating. But what I'll tell you right now, while this thing was cranking and not starting, there was something that I noticed that was kind of a dead giveaway as to what our problem might be. And 2 different things showed up. So the first thing that I noticed down here was this little mileage counter didn't have any numbers. It just had dashes. The second thing that I noticed was up here, there's a little anti-theft light. Well, that light was flashing while this thing was cranking and not starting. Now, the reason I say that the dashes here on the mileage counter are a dead giveaway is because this is something that I've seen before in plenty of other Ford vehicles, where if you have a problem with the PCM not communicating, or if you have a bad ground for the PCM, or if you have a bad power feed to the PCM, you will not see the numbers come up here on the mileage counter. You're just going to see dashes. And then oftentimes you'll see the theft light flashing, because at that point, the PAT security system cannot communicate with the key in the ignition. So if you guys notice right now, you can see that we do have our mileage counter up. We're showing 212,000 miles. So this truck has been through a lot in its lifetime. So I don't want to see anybody bashing Ford or F-150 trucks in the comment section, because come on, man, it's made it this far. Having problems like this, it's typical for any vehicle once you're up in the higher mileage like this to have issues. So if you don't have anything nice to say, just keep it to yourself. So at this point, I'm pretty confident that if I were to turn the key, the engine would crank and it would start. And that's because, like I said, our mileage counter is showing our mileage and we don't have an anti-theft light on. So I'm gonna go ahead and try to crank this thing over. You guys can see our engine started right up. Now, once it's running, it's actually idling really smooth. I haven't really driven it yet, which is what I'm actually planning on doing, because at this point, I do believe that more than likely what we're dealing with is a problem with the power feed to the engine computer. And the reason I say that is because I already did a visual inspection on the ground, and the ground connection actually looks pretty clean to me. Let me take you guys under the hood and show you real quick. All right, so taking a look under the hood, let me show you guys where the computer grounds are located. Sorry about this hood. These hood struts are completely blown, so the hood will not stay up. I have to hold it up. So let me get in here and show you guys where the computer ground is located. It's up against the firewall. Now, if you take a look at this bolt here on the firewall, that is our computer ground. You can see that we don't have any corrosion. The other thing that you'll notice is that when I try to move these, this bolt is not loose. Nothing here is loose. So I don't see any obvious problem with the ground. In my mind, I'm more concerned about a power feed issue to the engine computer, which, if you guys are wondering, the engine computer is located right down here. You can see that connector, that gray connector. And if we take a look over here on the left-hand side of the engine bay, this is our fuse box where our PCM diode and our PCM relay is located. That is where I'm suspecting that we may have a failure. But at this point, the only way to verify that is to get this thing to act up. And while this thing is a crank, while this thing is a crank no start, we can come under the hood, check our power diode for the PCM and check our PCM power relay, see if those two components are functioning correctly. Then we'll know what direction we should go to from there. So I'm gonna go for a test drive and see if I can get this thing to act up. All right, guys, so before we continue any further, I want to take a quick moment to go over the wiring diagram with you, kind of give you my thought process, what it is I think that's happening here, and what I feel like our next step should be in the diagnostic. So again, like I said, what I feel like what we're dealing with here is going to be a communication problem with the PCM, or the powertrain control module. And the reason behind that is because, like I said, when I saw that the odometer had dashes instead of the numbers, it's something that I had seen before. It's something that's pretty common on Fords. It is a dead giveaway that the computer is not communicating. And so anytime that you have an issue with a computer module not communicating on a vehicle, of course, one of the first things you want to check are going to be the main powers and the grounds to that module. Because the reasoning behind that is the same as with your computer in your house, your desktop. It's not going to turn on unless you plug it into the wall. The same thing with the computer on the vehicle. It's not going to power up unless it has its main powers and its main grounds. And so that's what we need to do, is check to see how many powers and grounds there are, where do they get them from, and make sure that they have them. So here we have the wiring diagram, and if you look over here to the right, this dotted box where it says solid state, this is going to be our powertrain control module. If you look over here to the left, you'll see this other box here, this dotted line. This is going to be the battery junction box. That is the fuse box that's under the hood. And inside of that battery junction box, we have two really important components. The first one is going to be this PCM power relay, and the other one is going to be this PCM power diode. Now, if we follow this wiring diagram back, you can see that this PCM power relay on the control side here gets its power from this PCM power diode, which in turn gets its power from this 30 amp fuse that's located in the central junction box. Now the central junction box is going to be the fuse box that's inside the cab. So if you take a look here at the top, it says that this fuse is going to be hot in start or run, meaning that the ignition switch has to be in the on position. So this circuit will only be powered up whenever the key is on. So again, with the key on, we're going to have power going through this 30 amp fuse. It's going to be going through this red and light green wire. It's going to be coming into the PCM power diode. Now this PCM power diode is replaceable. It looks like a fuse, but it's not a fuse. Essentially what it does is it only allows power to flow in one direction. You guys can see the arrow, and it's pointing in this direction toward the relay. So again, the power is going to flow through the PCM power diode, and then it's going to go into the control side of the PCM power relay, through the coil winding, out the other side of the relay here. The important thing to note is that this is a ground at all times. It's not a switched ground. What this means is that as soon as the power comes through on this fuse and through this power diode and through the relay, it's going straight to a ground, and that's going to energize the coil winding in this relay, which in turn is going to close the switch on this side and allow the power to flow from this 30 amp fuse over here through this yellow and black wire, through the PCM power relay, and out through this violet wire. Now if you take a look here, you can see that it continues on letter A, which is actually on the same page, just right over here. You can see the letter A is our continuation of the violet wire, and right over here it goes through a fuse, which is a 15 amp fuse, fuse number 18, inside the battery junction box, which is the same fuse box that's under the hood. And once it exits the 15 amp fuse here, it's going to go through this red wire. And if you follow this red wire here, you can see that it goes to the powertrain control module, but before it gets there, there's actually a splice where this one power feed spreads off into two separate directions. So the power feed from this PCM power relay not only feeds pin number 97 in the PCM, but it also feeds pin number 71. So we have two ignition powers here at the PCM. Again, one on pin 97 and one on pin 71. They both come from this PCM power relay. Now this is really important because if there's a problem with this PCM power relay, we're not going to be getting power here at either pin number 97 or 71. Likewise, if we have a problem with the PCM power diode, we would have the same symptoms here where we're not going to get the power at pin number 97 or 71. Now these two components, the PCM power relay and the PCM power diode. I have had to replace these before on other Ford vehicles. Again, this is not something that I haven't seen before. I have run into this problem where this PCM power diode will intermittently fail. Likewise, I have seen these PCM power relays fail. And so this could be a totally intermittent problem where, it doesn't happen all the time. And sometimes it's very frustrating because you can't really seem to catch it whenever it's happening. But when it finally does, there is a quick way that we could check it. In our case here, if you take a look, again, this fuse number 18 in the battery junction box, this 15 amp fuse, if we have power here at this fuse, then we know that everything over here on this side is good. Now, if we went to check this fuse and we didn't find any power here, we would know we would have to trace back to either the PCM power relay or the PCM power diode. Of course, one of the checks I want to do is whenever the truck starts to act up, it becomes a no start. I'm going to come over to this fuse 18 right here and I'm going to check it, make sure that we have power on both sides of the fuse. If we don't, then we're going to back trace it to the PCM power relay. We're going to make sure that we're getting our input from the PCM power diode, and we're going to try to figure out where our problem is coming from. And so this is only part of the circuit. Again, these two power inputs on pin 97 and 71 are only two of the main powers. We also have one more main power on this other diagram. Let me switch over. Okay, so taking a look at this other diagram here, you can see that we have our powertrain control module over here on this side. And if we follow this up here from pin number 55, we follow it up on this red and white wire, you can see that this power comes from a 5 amp fuse number 2, inside of the central junction box, which is the fuse box located inside the cab. And what's really important here is if you take a look at the top here, it says that this fuse is hot at all times. So that means that this pin number 55 should have power at all times. Even with the key out of the ignition, this power should be there all the time. Now, generally, that means that this power is for some type of keep alive memory. The engine computer has to have some type of power in order to keep its internal clock running and to keep that internal memory stored. And so that's what this is for here. So again, we have our PCM power diode over here on the left side, our PCM power relay, and we have the output over here. And what we're going to be following it on this fuse number 18, which is a 15 amp fuse. And of course, we're going to be looking at this fuse number 2 inside of the junction box. Hopefully we can get this truck to act up, become a no start. And again, like I said, the two fuses that I want to attack are going to be this fuse number 18 and the fuse number 2. One that's under the hood and one that's inside of the cab. And that should tell us where our powers are missing, if in fact we have a problem with the missing power. So moving on to our grounds, you can see over here pin number 24, pin number 51, pin number 76, pin number 77, and pin number 103. All of these grounds, you can see that there's a splice here. They all join in on the same ground connection, which is this G101. Now, I've already showed this ground to you guys. I have inspected it and it does look good, but there's still a possibility that we could have a problem in this splice, or maybe one of these wires is damaged and we could have a bad connection to ground at just one of these pins. But if we wanted to check these grounds and verify them, we would have to do a pin out on the PCM, which in our case here is a lot more easier said than done. But really, I'm not too worried about these grounds. Again, like I said, visually, these grounds look good. I'm more concerned about the power side. What my plan is that we're going to drive this truck. Hopefully we can get this thing to act up. Once the vehicle becomes a crank no start, then we're going to move under the hood. We're going to check this fuse number 18, which is a 15 amp fuse. We're going to see if we have power there. If we don't have power there, then we're going to trace it back to either the PCM power relay or the PCM power diode. And then again, if we have power here, then we're going to move over to the fuse number 2, which is the 5 amp fuse inside of the central junction box. We're going to make sure that this fuse has power on both sides. And if we find that we have power on both our fuse number 18 and our fuse number 2, then, we're going to have to do a pin out on the PCM, which means that we're going to have to go directly to the PCM connector and check our main powers and grounds there. But really, that's going to be the last resort, or the last thing that we want to do, because of course we're going to try to keep it simple. We're going to do what's more accessible first, what's easier to test. Like I said, It wouldn't surprise me if we had a problem with this relay acting up, or if we had a problem with this PCM power diode acting up, because I have seen this before. So anyway, with that in mind, let's go ahead and move back to the vehicle, see if we can get this thing to act up, do our checks, and see if we can narrow down this problem.
1 hour later.
All right, guys, so unfortunately, after a pretty extensive test drive, I still can't get this thing to act up. I'm gonna go ahead and take the key, stick it into the ignition, turn the ignition on. If you guys take a look at the instrument cluster, you can see, again, we have our mileage counter showing up. We do not have a theft light, so this thing should start right up. Let me go ahead and crank it. The truck starts up right away, so at this point, I think we might just do some basic checks, and if we can't get it to act up, we're gonna have to come back tomorrow. All right, so here's something that's noteworthy. If you guys take a look, I have the scan tool here. I'm using the Launch X431 Pro 3S Plus, and what you'll notice is that at the moment the engine is running. You can see once again our mileage counter is up, our anti-theft light is not on, and the engine is up and running. So I would assume that we should be able to communicate using the scan tool. When I come in here to Intelligent Diagnosis, which you guys can see it's connecting to the VCI. It has connected to the VCI, which is located right down there. You guys can see I have it plugged in. But if you take a look, when it's trying to read the VIN from the PCM, it's not able to. So give this thing a minute here. It's trying to communicate with the engine computer. It's reading, it's reading, it's reading. And there we have it. It was not able to detect the VIN automatically. You can see it's telling us that it can't detect it automatically. So we come into local diagnosis here. I'm just gonna go into a global OBD2 mode. Now this is not the mode where it's the factory Ford software. So if we come over here, you'll see that we have the Ford software right here. I'm not going directly into the Ford software. I'm gonna go into the global mode. And this is what you can do with any cheap scan tool. Go into global OBD2 mode, and you should have at least some minimal type of communication with this thing. Because again, the computer is alive and awake, and it is running the engine at the moment. So we should be able to communicate it and try to extract some maybe trouble codes or maybe even some live data. But take a look at what happens. You can see the first protocol here, it failed. Now it's checking the second protocol here. It's gonna go down the list, failed and failed. So this thing has failed to communicate even using the global OBD2 mode. So this does tell us that even though our computer is alive and awake, it's able to run the engine, but we're not able to communicate using the scan tool. So it seems like to me, this PCM is only partially awake. So it's possible that at the moment, we could be missing one of our powers or one of our grounds. So let's do some basic checks. So the first thing I would like to do is connect this breakout box right here to the DLC connector. I'm gonna go ahead and pull out my little dongle for my scan tool. Then I'm going to plug in the connector for our breakout box. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be checking for power and ground at the DLC connector. So what we're gonna be looking for are pins number 4, which is our ground, and pin number 16, which is our battery power feed. So I've got my power probe right here. It is connected to the battery. And when I touch a ground, it should turn green. And when I touch a power, it should turn red. So I'm gonna go ahead and touch this ground. You can see that we light up green, and we are showing a good ground on pin number 4. Now let's check pin number 16. You guys can see we have full battery voltage on pin number 16. So at this point, we know it's not a problem with the power feed or ground to our data link connector. So let's move on to checking our fuses. All right, so moving under the hood to the fuse box, let me show you guys where fuse number 18 is located. It's right over here. This is our 15 amp fuse, fuse number 18. So as long as we have power on this fuse, which I'm going to assume that we do have power, because at the moment the engine is running. If we didn't have power there, more than likely it wouldn't be running. But anyway, we're gonna go ahead and check power. And once again, if we do have power here, that tells us that our relay is closed, our diode is working, and power is getting sent to our engine computer. So I'm gonna go ahead and touch this side of the fuse here. You guys can see we do have a power feed. I'm gonna touch the other side of the fuse. And again, you guys can see we do have full battery voltage on both sides of that fuse. Next up, let's move inside the cab. All right, so moving into the fuse box located in the cab, I'm gonna go ahead and pull this little thing off here. And if we take a look, you can see that this is our fuse box. Should be able to pull this little cover off like so. And then we're going to locate fuse number 2. Let's take a look at this label here. Fuse number 2 is going to be this 5 amp fuse right over here. So we're going to take our power probe, and again, we're just going to touch each side of the fuse, and we're going to see if we have power. So we have power there. I'm going to touch the other side of the fuse. And you guys can see we have full battery voltage on both sides of this 5 amp fuse. All right, guys, so at this point, it looks like we have 2 options here. So for one, we could decide to go ahead and do a pinout at the PCM, which, like I said, is located right over here behind the battery down in the firewall. So our first option is we could go ahead, pull that computer out and do a pinout, check for main powers and grounds at the computer. And we can see if maybe, quite possibly, we're missing a power feed at the computer or a ground. Maybe we'll find something, maybe we won't. You know, this communication problem between the engine computer and the scan tool could have something to do with the internals of the engine computer. Maybe the computer has some internal damage to it. So if we find that we have all of our powers and grounds directly at the computer, then we may just have to double check our communication lines. We can do an ohm measurement from this point in the wiring harness to the data link connector inside of the cab. But our second option here is that we can wait to see if we can get this thing to become a no start again. And while this thing is a crank no start, we can come over here and verify whether or not we have power on our fuse 18 like we originally intended to, or check to see if we have power on our fuse number 2 inside of the cab. Eliminate there being a possible issue with a relay or a diode. And then from there, we'll have enough physical evidence to push us toward doing a pinout on the engine computer. Now, in my particular case, I actually have another appointment to get to. There's a shop waiting on me to go take a look at 3 other cars. And so this truck here is taking a little bit longer than I was expecting. I should have actually been out of here an hour ago, but I was really hoping that I could recreate the issue because, like I said, when I first got here, this thing was a crank no start. It just didn't do it long enough for me to actually be able to do some pinpoint checking. So I'm going to talk to the customer. I may have to come back tomorrow. Hopefully when we come back, this thing is a crank no start. Then we can come in here and verify whether we may have a bad diode or a relay. And if we find that everything here is good, then we're going to go ahead and do a pinout on the engine computer.
Tomorrow.
All right, guys, so it is the following day. I am back. And unfortunately, this thing still does not want to act up. Let me show you. So I have the key right here in my hand. Once again, I'm going to get back into the truck. And what I was hoping was when I first got here that this thing would be a crank no start like it was when I first came to look at the truck. So let me show you. I'm going to put the key into the ignition. Take a look. You see that our mileage indicator is showing our mileage. The theft light went out. So this thing should start right up. And just like I said, the thing starts right up and it runs just fine. Now, one other thing I wanted to note was that I mentioned that I was having a communication problem with the scan tool. If you guys recall, I was using the X431 Pro 3S Plus yesterday, and we were not able to communicate with this. But let me show you guys what I found out today. Now, nothing against this scan tool. The scan tool is awesome. I use it all the time. It has kind of been my go-to scan tool lately. But, you know, with all scan tools, usually you have some hiccups or some software bugs that need to be worked out. And a lot of times it just has something to do with an update or resetting your scan tool. But what I can tell you right now is that when I tried to communicate with this pickup truck using this particular scan tool, it will not communicate. I've already tried it again and it still does not want to communicate. But let's say if I take the Think tool, you guys have seen me use this plenty of times. I've already got the dongle connected to the OBD2 connector down there. And I'm going to go ahead and hit diagnosis. We're going to select Ford and watch as this thing has no problem communicating with this vehicle. Now I'm going to hit automatically search. Now it's going to try to automatically detect the VIN. And if we are able to, then we do have communication. And as you guys can see, there's our VIN number, year, make, and model. So it has detected the engine computer. I can go in here and we can pretty much do anything we need to do. Come in here and try to do system selection. Let's go ahead and pick the PCM, and then I'm going to do some basic checks. We'll read some fault codes, see if we have any fault codes stored. So I'm going to go up here and hit read fault code, retrieve continuous memory data trouble codes, and there we have it. It says there is no DTC stored in this computer. So what I can tell you right now is that I don't believe we have a communication problem with our engine computer like I did before, because again, like I said, with the X431 Pro 3S Plus, we were just not able to communicate with this computer in either the Ford software or the global mode. And what I can tell you is I've already been able to communicate with both modes using the Think tool. And not only the Think tool, but I also went the extra step and I grabbed my other launch scan tool, which is the Launch X431 Pro Mini. And with this one, I'm also able to communicate with both the Ford software and with the global mode. So at this point, I'm pretty confident that we don't have a communication error with our PCM. It just has something to do with the scan tool that I was using at the moment. Nothing against the scan tool. It's a great, awesome scan tool. There's just a bug that probably needs to be worked out using an update. All right, guys, so at this point, unfortunately, because of my time constraint, my scheduling, and the fact that I have to drive 45 minutes out of my way to come take a look at this vehicle, I just can't keep going back and forth waiting for this thing to act up. I've already been here about an hour and a half now trying to get it to not start, but it just wants to start up every single time. So at this point, rather than me just waiting around, and then also the customer is hoping to try to get a resolution, and you know, I kind of feel bad that I really can't give him a definitive answer at this point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to recommend replacing the two items that I feel are most likely to be the culprit. And that's going to be, number one, the PCM power relay, which is located right here in the battery junction box. And then the second thing is this diode here. This is the PCM power diode that feeds the power to the PCM relay. Now, I've actually seen both or one or two of these items fail. It's pretty common. I have seen these diodes where oftentimes intermittently they will fail. I've also seen these relays where they will intermittently fail. And like I said, you know, it may be something that's a contact issue. It may have something to do with the ambient temperature outside. Maybe early in the morning when it's nice and cold, you know, that's when this thing doesn't want to connect. It could also be that, you know, once the engine bay warms up, that's when either one of these two components starts to act up. But in my case, I'm really thinking it has more to do with the truck sitting and the engine bay being cold, because, you know, once I get this thing started and running and the engine is warmed up, it doesn't want to act up anymore. So like I said, really the only thing that I can recommend at this point is to go ahead and replace both of these components, because quite honestly, they're not very expensive. They're very easy for me to go ahead and replace. And then I just have to wait to hear from the owner, let him drive the vehicle around, wait a couple days, maybe a week or so, see if it starts to act up again. If it acts up again, then yeah, we're definitely going to have to come back, and then we're going to, again, hopefully try to catch this thing while it's acting up. But at this point, I'm going to go ahead and run to the auto parts store. I'm going to get replacements for both of those, and we're going to come back, stick them in there, let the customer drive this thing, and see what happens. I guess one other side note that I'd like to add is that, you know, some of you guys may be thinking about this ground, but, you know, I'll tell you right now, I've already come over here and I've taken, shit, good. Now, as a quick side note, some of you guys may be wondering about the ground or maybe even the connector on the engine computer. I'll tell you right now, I've already tried to play with both the ground wiring harness. You know, I've moved this around, you know, checking to see if we lose communication and if the engine stalls, but nothing happens when I move that ground. And also, I did try to mess with the connector for the PCM, which is located down here. So I grabbed the connector, let's try to move it, you know, see if it's loosely connected, or maybe it's got a bad connection, or maybe a problem in the harness. But when I move this thing around, this engine does not stall. We don't have any dropout in the communication, so I don't think that that's a problem. All right, guys, so after a quick trip to the auto parts and the Ford dealership, because I couldn't get this at any AutoZone or O'Reilly Auto Parts, anything like that, I had to go to the Ford dealer, and this is the Ford part number there if you guys are interested. So this is for the PCM power diode. It's also the same part number for the AC clutch diode. So if you guys need the AC clutch diode replaced, this is the one right here. But the one we're going to be replacing is for the PCM, which is this one right here. So I'm going to pull it out like that. And we are going to maybe take a quick visual inspection first, see if we can see any green crusties or any burned contacts. I don't see any of that. So we're just going to go ahead and set that one aside. We're going to install our brand new one from Ford and make sure it's in there nice and properly. Next up, we're going to go ahead and pull out the PCM power relay located right here. Oh, this one's kind of difficult to get out. Come on, there we go. All right, so once again, we're going to do a quick visual inspection, take a look at these terminals. I don't see any green corrosion. I don't see any burned contacts, nothing obvious. So we're going to go ahead and stick our new one in here. It's just a typical 5-pin relay that you'll find in most Fords. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that we install this correctly. Yeah, that way. push it in all the way, and we are all set to go. I'm gonna go ahead and stick this cover back on here, clip it down, and then we're gonna go ahead and make sure that we can start up the truck. All right, so we're in the truck. I'm gonna go ahead and see if this thing starts up. Once again, you guys can see that our theft light is not blinking, and we do have our mileage displayed here on the odometer. The truck starts and runs. I know at this point we can't completely call this a fix. We're gonna wait to see what the customer says within the next few days, and I'll keep you guys posted. All right, guys, so fast forward. It has now been about 3 weeks since we last saw the truck. I'm not exaggerating. I've been sitting on this video for a while now because I wanted to be sure that we actually fixed the problem. I can tell you right now, when I was there last, it was October 7th. Today is November the 1st, and I'm hoping to upload this video tomorrow. So yeah, it's been about 3 weeks now since we last saw the truck, and I just talked to the customer. I text messaged him, asked him how the truck was doing, because I actually hadn't heard from him in this entire time. And you know, a lot of times in this business, no news is good news. So a lot of times customers, you know, they won't call you to update you. They're busy. You know, I'm busy, they're busy, everyone's busy. I get it. So I just kind of sent him a text message, asked him how the truck was doing. And he said that it seems to have fixed the problem. So at this point, I'm pretty confident that we can call this a fix. Now, I know a lot of you guys were hoping to see some type of evidence when we were doing our testing, but you know, sometimes in this field, you kind of have to go with your gut instinct, and you kind of have to do what makes sense, because at that point, it didn't make sense for me to go the extra mile trying to pull the PCM out and do back probing, pinouts, checking powers and grounds directly at the PCM, charging for that extra labor when the parts that we replaced, which was the relay and the diode, you know, were relatively cheap compared to the amount of labor it would have taken for me to do the checks. And then on top of that, checking our powers and grounds at the PCM really wasn't going to tell us anything unless we found that maybe we were missing a power or a ground. Because if you guys think about it, you know, if we went to check the PCM and we found all our powers and grounds were there, you know, it would be speculation for us to say that, oh, the PCM is bad. On top of that, one of the things that kind of threw me off, you guys saw in the video, was the issue that I had with the scan tool not being able to communicate, which had nothing to do with the vehicle. It was something to do with the scan tool, which, like I said, nothing against the scan tool, which I have sitting right over here. This is the Launch X431 Pro 3S Plus. And like I said, this right now is my go-to scan tool. I've had a lot of luck with the scan tool, and comparing it with the Autel MaxiSys that I have over here, I've actually been able to do some functions, especially on BMWs, that I'm not able to do with the MaxiSys that I was able to do with this one over here. I had this BMW where the shop had replaced one of the rear struts, and the struts had to be coated. I couldn't do it with the MaxiSys, but I was able to do it with the Launch X431 Pro, and all I had to do was copy the old coating from the old part and paste it over to the new one. So that was really cool. There was a function that was in this one that this tool didn't have, or I think it had it, but you had to buy an extra cable to make it work. I didn't have that cable because it didn't come with the kit, and so this one was able to do it without any extra accessories. Anyway, what I found out after I got back home and hooked this thing up to the internet, I found that I was way behind on updates. So I ended up running a whole bunch of updates on this thing. And so I'm hoping that that may have fixed the problem. But like I said, I haven't been back to go look at the truck because the truck is pretty out of the way for me. It's about an hour and 20-minute drive for me from my house to where that truck is located. So right now, I just haven't had time to go back to verify whether or not updating this thing actually fixed the communication issue. Anyway, at this point, I'm gonna end off the video. Like I always say, I hope you guys found it useful, informational, educational, entertaining. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.